All right, we might as well get going here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Salzer from Axiomatic, and today we're going to be talking about the new Mosaic sharing pool site that relies on new software that DRA put in last year. So I'm going to kind of walk through some PowerPoint slides, talk about the data a little bit, then we'll do a live demonstration. If you have questions as we're going through this, feel free to stop me. If you don't hear me stopping to respond to you, it's because you're most likely on mute. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can send a question via the chat. I'll send a test chat out right now. So if you have a question and you don't hear me responding, or you think there's something else going on, feel free to just type it in and I'll read your question out loud and do my best to respond to it. So to give a little background, the Mosaic is a statewide parcel layer with a related database of CAMA data. So essentially, it's information that is exported from the municipalities and normalized together. 2010 was the first edition of the Mosaic. 2019 was the 10th edition. So this edition that's coming out probably in the next week and a half will be the 11th edition. So it's used for a lot of different things throughout the state. First off, it's a big part of the equalization process. The CAMA data used as part of what goes on in the sales validation work. Secondly, there's a municipal sharing pool, which many of you have been part of for a long time and is now expanding out. And then thirdly, there are a lot of other agencies around the state that use this data. Two of the biggest users are DES and DOT. They use it for all kinds of different things. And the Department of Safety uses this data extensively as well, including the state police. So it provides a valuable resource for a lot of different agencies that do a plethora of different things, from highway corridor studies to well sampling, if any of you are familiar with the problems that they had in, say, Litchfield with their water contamination, excuse me. So DES was involved in that, and the parcel data helped them as they went through that process. So at its core, the data set is really comprised of two things, parcels and CAMA. And so starting off with looking at the CAMA, really what we try to do is normalize all the data, and we do that by running them through a set of processes that are first vendor specific. So we know that, for example, all avatar files will come in the same format. And then we do secondary processing on them for things that may be town specific, the format of your ID, how you indicate book pages, things like that, land use codes. So in this, what we call ETL process, which is just an acronym for extract, transform, load, which is just a fancy terminology for taking a file you send and putting it in a standard format. So essentially, we take the 236 different jurisdictions data, we standardize the fields, we associate the state land use code, which is something that you'll see when we look in the app. So the ability to take all the different local land use codes and correlate them to the state list. We link and track unmatched records. So we look for records that don't align, whether they're parcel records without CAMA or CAMA records without parcels. We track those and we indicate them accordingly. And then we do a bunch of metrics on year-over-year change. And we'll look at that a little bit. So we track changes in assessed value, changes in size of properties, things like that. And that allows DRA to look at different data as they're going about their business. So the first piece of data we collect are parcels. And parcels are just a graphical representation of a legal description. Essentially, the majority of New Hampshire communities have their parcel data in a geospatial format. So they have GIS polygons, which is what you see here in the image on the right. And when you have parcel polygons, that means that you have areas that represent parcels and they have identification data behind them. And it's basically the best form of parcel data that you can have currently. There are about 12 municipalities that still have what we call less friendly formats of data. So they have AutoCAD or paper. And those municipalities, we get into the system, but their data is a little more limited. As you can see, with AutoCAD data, we're only able to locate the centroids of parcels. And with towns with paper maps, we're only able to break them down into their indices. It represents a very small percentage of the total parcels. There are about 695,000 CAMA records and about 605,000 parcels. So the ones that are represented by these non-GIS types represent a very small amount. And each year, those are going away. For example, the town of Errol just went to GIS parcel polygons this year. They were the most recent to to leave their paper map. On the CAMA side, so we don't actually collect CAMA, we collect an export from the municipal CAMA, and that contains summary information. The goal is that we collect the file so that the values correspond to the MS1. So if you look in the table on the right, we can see we collect basic identification information, owner, land, and improvement information. In addition, the valuation breakdown. So we're not getting very far into specifics about properties, just their basic information enough to kind of understand, is it improved, what type of improvement is on it, what's the value. So one of the things we're adding in this year for the 2020 data set, and I'll actually show it to you in the raw data, not the application, is the introduction of the alias neighborhood code. So over the past 5 years, we've seen a big increase in requests for neighborhood code mapping due to use pack reports, I believe. So the challenge there is that every town has a different neighborhood coding scheme. So what we've done is essentially take everyone's neighborhood codes, keep their local codes, and then we alias them to a list. So let's say town A has A, B, and C as their land use codes, and town B has X, Y, and Z. We've created a translation, and we correlate those to a standard, 1, 2, 3 list, which allows us to get everyone's neighborhood codes into the system, so you can look at parcels by neighborhood code without having to worry about having 50 or 60 separate thousand individual codes. So that's a new thing coming for this year. We try to keep building off the data as we can. From 2010 to 2019, sorry, there's an extra 2010 on my slide, I apologize. DRA used an open source map engine. So they were building all this data and they had us helping them compile it and manage it. And then they were loading it into an application that used somewhat older technology, and that's what many of you use to go through the sharing pool. So it had basic search and view functionality, but it wasn't as current as a lot of GIS applications have become. So essentially at that point, DRA started looking at other options to figure out what's the best way to serve this data and how can they use it even more internally than they already do. So in 2019, they switched to the ArcGIS Enterprise platform. ArcGIS Enterprise is a very powerful platform. It's server side and allows us to build all kinds of different applications, dashboards, all kinds of different things. So many of you are probably familiar with the Johns Hopkins COVID dashboard. That dashboard is built off of ArcGIS Enterprise. We have dashboards that look somewhat similar to that, and I can show you if you. DRA has been integrating GIS into other areas of their business as well, not just property and municipal. Obviously, timber is part of property, but that's a new piece that they've moved into, is actually using field devices that have offline capabilities as they do timber harvest yield verifications. And then also in collections. Collections has some advanced viewers that allow them to see all the different people who have meals and rooms licenses, where they exist, what parcels they're on, et cetera. So obviously we're trying to expand this even more and bring out the sharing pool, but kind of expand it and make it available to all municipalities and make better tools, and we can even modify these tools. This is the great thing about Enterprise, is that we have a lot of ability to customize and adjust things to users' needs. So as you guys start to use it more and we start to obtain feedback from users, we can make modifications and tweak accordingly. So some of the things that you're going to see today that are new. Themed layers. So what you're looking at right here on the map is downtown Portsmouth parcels are themed by their assessed value, total assessed value. This is, I think, somewhere in Barnstead. We're looking at parcels by their land use codes. This could be, we have views of percent change of value of parcels, of improved versus unimproved. I mean, we can theme maps in all kinds of different ways now, including neighborhood code. Here we see sales information. So we see sale parcels with their ratio showing, and then we see excluded parcels with their exclusion code showing. We can build heat maps. So this is a heat map of sales on the seacoast. You can see the yellow areas represent the highest density, blue represent the lowest. So we have all kinds of capability with the new system to manage data and do different things. We're going to talk about version 11 in a minute. I think I want to jump into the demo first. Before I do that, are there any questions? All right. So many of you have requested your credentials. We're waiting until after the training today to start releasing them. So following this session, you'll get credentials. They'll be emailed to you. You just log into the app and it'll take you to this site. The site has a splash screen, first off, just saying you understand the usage of the data, tells you who to contact if you have questions. When I hit OK there, I'm now in. I can do whatever I want in the application at that point. So what we've tried to do is lay out this application to look similar to the one that you used to use for the sharing pool, although it has way more functionality involved in it now. So here we have the map window. This contains all of our mapping data. On the left-hand side, we have the searches. So we have a basic CAMA, advanced CAMA, and a person search. And so those searches look at different information. We can build different versions of them. We have derivatives. I can show you DRA's internal site. They have a few more searches available. And we can change those over time. It's really going to be based on feedback we get from users. So there are two ways to look at data. We can search through CAMA over here if we want to, or we can just zoom into the map. So I could zoom by using my zoom controls, or I can just roll the wheel of my mouse like I would on, say, Google Maps. And when I do that, we see more data is turning on, more data becomes available. We're using, by default, what's called the navigation-based map. So that looks somewhat like Google Maps. You have many other base maps available to you by default. So you can go here to the base map indicator. You can select imagery. You can pick what a lot of people like, the imagery hybrid. Excuse me, I select the wrong button, which gives you not just imagery, but road names and other features. There are things like the light gray canvas, which is good if you're printing a map, which just kind of gives you basic building footprints and not too much more. You have terrain maps, topo maps, streets, night streets. I mean, there's all kinds of different options depending on what you want to look at. By default, we leave you on the navigation one because, in my opinion, this looks most analogous to Google Maps, which people find as a pretty friendly common interface. So that's base maps. We have those at any time. And then we also have the different layers that exist in the system. So like in any GIS, the map is comprised of different layers. We have the ortho photos that the state produces, both 2010 and 2015. You can turn those on if you choose to. And then we have a few different layers. We see our EQ 2019 excluded and EQ 2019 included sales, parcels by land use, parcels by assessed value. So if I click on any of these, it's going to turn that layer on. So now what you can see is I've changed my view now and I'm looking at parcels by their land use. If I want, I can turn that off. So what you'll note is as you zoom in and out, things turn on and off by default, and some things are not able to be turned on. So for example, the 2019 included sales heat map is disabled at this threshold because a heat map isn't very useful when you're this far zoomed in. If I zoom out, you notice that all the parcels turn off, but I can turn that heat map on. Be mindful when you do heat mapping that it does require a lot of processing power, so it can take longer to run. So if you're looking at, like, as we pan over here and I get towards Manchester, it's going to take a lot more processing power to cluster the points accordingly. So the heat map only exists at a limited zoom threshold, but the farther out you get, the more data you're pulling, the longer it can take to generate that heat map because it's doing it dynamically. So those are your layers. Those are always available to you. If you don't want to, you never have to look in the layers panel because the parcels and the other layers will turn on by default, the ones that you're most likely looking for. So we'll go into downtown Manchester. So when I'm ready to, I could just click on a parcel. And at that point, I get a pop-up. And it says, this is the parcel ID, this is the address, this is who owns it, this is their land area, this is their state land use code, which is coming up as an unknown or other, which makes sense given that it's a church. We have the assessed value, and then below it, we have the related information. So the system is saying there's CAMA records related to this parcel because we could have clicked on a condo association. And when we clicked on the condo building, it would have said, here are 15 CAMA records that belong. So I can click on that and it says there's one CAMA record, here it is. So I can blow that CAMA record up if I wanted, and I see all the details. So all the identifiers, the owner's mailing address, any building information we have on file, the assessment, last year's assessment, and any assessment difference. From here, we're looking at the current year's CAMA table. It'll say, do you want to look at prior year's CAMA? So I can say, yes, I want to look at prior year's CAMA for this record. And then I see all the prior years that are available. I'll look at 17. We don't show every prior year we have in the system on file. We show the current year plus 4 years back. So you have a 5-year history. And you can click on any parcel and get that information. So that's kind of how you would click on the map and do it. You can measure as well. For those of you who are looking for measurement tools, those exist. You can do a line, an area, or a point. So clicking on the map and looking for things is, interesting enough, but most users go through the CAMA search to begin with. So I'm starting here. I'll go back just so you can see I have my list of searches. I select the basic CAMA search, and now I have some different options. I can pick a county, I can pick a town, or I can enter an address, an owner, a parcel ID, a CAMA ID, or I can pick by state land use code. So I could say, all right, I want you to show me everyone in Rye who has a commercial land and building. And I'll hit apply. And what the system will do is search through the almost 700,000 CAMA records, and it will give you the results. And it'll say, here are the results. Here's summary information about all of them. So it's showing us the address, the town, and then the owner's name. So we can click on any of these records and it will expand and show us summary information. So in this case, we're not showing all the CAMA. We're just saying, here's the address, the owner, their basic mailing address, and the assessed value. I can select prior year CAMA if I want to look at prior year's CAMA. I can select parcels if I want the system to zoom me right to the parcel in question. When it does that, now it's taking me to Rye, and it's Abenaki Country Club. So I can always go back to my searches. Let's say that I wasn't really concerned with map data, but I wanted to get this information out into Excel. I could click here. There are 3 little dots, and I could say export to CSV. When I do that, it's going to save that information. Here we have it. So it allows you to get information out of the system quickly. And then we could also, in that submenu with the 3 dots, say, show me all the related records. So the first thing it's saying is, do you want to see all of the prior year CAMAs related to all of those, whatever we had, 60 parcels? I don't really care about the prior year CAMA, but I do want to see where the parcels are themselves. So what this has done now is selected all of the parcels that are commercial land and building and highlighted them in blue for me. So now I know where all those commercial land and building parcels are in Rye, for example. So let's say you want to look in more than one town at this. Let's say we wanted to do this. We'll pick a small county. We'll pick Belknap County. And we'll run the same search. We're saying, show us all the things that have been coded as commercial land and building that exist in Belknap County. And we get 962 of those. You can see the town is in between. And we can always change the order of how things appear in this list. And we can control what appears here in the sub list. So in this case, let's say this 24 Basin Road record, I really was interested in their prior year CAMA. Well, I could go here, see their prior year records. All right, there's their 16. I could go to their 15, 18. So it allows us to view the different information pretty quickly. Any questions on any of that so far? So the advanced CAMA search just kind of goes to the next level. It says, all right, your county, town, owner. Now it adds co-owner, parcel ID, CAMA ID, state land use, land area range, building gross area range, and total assessed value range. So you could now say, I want to look in Rockingham County. And when I select state land use, the reason it's thinking for a second is because it's only going to show me land use codes that are applicable for records within that county. They show me single family homes that have a total assessed value between 2.5 million and 3 million. So it gives us 50 records that matched our criteria. Once again, we can export that information. We could say, nope, we want to look at it on a map. We'd rather look at related records. So it's no different than the viewer most of you would have in your respective towns. It just goes further in the fact that we're now crossing state or town boundaries, and we can go the entire state, specific towns, specific categories of property. And these searches can be built off of anything that you see in the CAMA list. So we could have building type as a field. You could have neighborhood code as a field. So there are all kinds of opportunities with searching. By default, we just try to configure these searches based on what we see as common criteria. The other search you have available is a person search. It is not searching through some other mysterious database. It's searching through the CAMA data, but only with the focus on people, owner, co-owner, mailing address. DRA uses the mailing address side very often when they're conducting discovery on audit cases, because it's very common for mailing addresses to be common among companies that will use different names or people who will hide their property in different ways. So mailing address is kind of one of the great tools that we use to figure out what's going on with property sometimes. So the person search isn't overly exciting. It just is searching for only person-based fields. So essentially you can search and view on anything you want. We didn't talk about a few other layers that exist that I'll show you. I know we just touched on them really briefly in the PowerPoint. Zoom into Manchester for this one. And we talked about those sales layers, the included and excluded. We're only showing 19 now. We could show every year. It really depends on what the users want and what you're looking to do. I mean, here I'm just showing 19 sales. Obviously, we'll have the 20 sales in very shortly. I think we have a few more towns that haven't completed their ratio studies yet. So generally, we wait until everyone's done before we put the data in. But essentially, we could show this as heat maps by ratio. You know, the upside here is that you can look at data, and using the color theming, you can see areas where maybe there's some consistent patterns that you might want to adjust or that tell you something about the sales. So in the new viewer for 2021, the sales that were excluded will show their exclusion code written out, not just the code number as well, for everyone who's not familiar with the exact exclusion code list. Any questions on anything we touched on so far? All right. Well, let me jump back to my PowerPoint here. We can talk about a few other things briefly. So version 11 of Mosaic is essentially complete. We're waiting on 2 more municipalities to finish their CAMA export, and we'll be getting that data pushed out. So essentially the 2021 data is going to look, or excuse me, version 11, which comes out in 2021, is going to look just like the data you saw, except we're building out a few more things. The first being the neighborhood alias code. The second will be full EQ data search integration. So you'll be able to search through included sales, excluded sales, grantors and grantees, not only from the sales that go through the ratio study, but the sales that have been excluded from the study. So that would include all kinds of non-arm's length transactions. From 2010 until now, we've collected approximately 700,000 deed index records. So those records will be available for you guys to search. The other thing we'll introduce is the value change layer. It's something that's not in the dashboard now, or excuse me, in the app now, but we can include it. So that's kind of what we're dealing with version 11. As soon as we get those last few towns wrapped up, we'll get the data published and we'll push it into the viewer and add the new searches. Really, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can do from there. I'm going to show you an example of the way the data is used in the dashboard format at DRA. So this is what we call the Mosaic X Dashboard. So it uses the same exact data set and map you were just looking at, except it converts the data and looks at widgets and different things. So we like to look at Bo. They just did a reval, so it's a good example of one. So the first thing it does when we select a town is all the widgets update, and it gives you a breakdown of the number of CAMA records, how many changed value. It gives you a heat map just of the town, only of the value change. So that's not sales. Those are the percent of change the assessed value. It gives us some metrics about assessed value, and you can see that they had a reval, so they had a pretty big increase in Bo that year. It shows you the average change in assessment. you see a list of the top 50 values or top 50 parcels and by percent change. We see a total assessed value graph, and then we see a graph of state land use code. So what we can do is use the state land use code and say, you know, we really want to look at just residential land. When we do that, the widgets update and report only information about residential land to us. If we zoom in further, the view of the map changes from the heat map to an actual map of the percent change in value by parcel. So this parcel changed 12.63% in assessed value. So that's the type of layer we'll be adding in for your portal when the version 11 data is done later this month. So it allows you to get an idea, you know, what value change. So that's kind of what this dashboard is geared towards, is looking at value change and allowing the users to look in specific categories. So this doesn't have to be done at the town level. We could go all the way up and say only report on single family homes across the state. So it's going to say there are 364, almost 365,000 single family homes in New Hampshire. The average assessed value is $307,000. So it's a cool way to look at data. It's just the dashboards are more interesting for, like all of us looking at COVID stats, you know, novelty views of information. It's not as useful as, say, the other browser the other tool we were just looking at, which I moved, I guess, because that lets you really look at data, pull data out, do analysis. This is just kind of spitting summary statistics at you. So I thought since we had an extra minute or two, I would show you that. And that's the kind of thing that could, you know, be made available to the towns. It's really just a question of, you know, what people are interested in seeing. So we did the demo. So essentially what happens next? Attendees of today's class will get their credentials issued. If you haven't requested your credentials yet, there's a form that you need to use. I know that went out with the notification that Pat sent regarding this training. If you don't have it, please feel free to email us at support@axiomnh.com. So we'll issue your credentials. You get an email. It'll have the link to log in, temporary username and password. When you log in, you'll be prompted to create your own password. Something to be mindful of is that in this application, Arc Enterprise, your usernames are cap sensitive, and that wreaks havoc because everyone's used to just being able to type in, say, your email for your username. For some reason, the Esri platform uses usernames, and your username will come spelled in a specific way with a certain cap sequence, and you have to follow that cap sequence or it won't let you log in. I know it's somewhat annoying, but I like to disclaim that ahead of time so people don't feel like, you know, they're alone and having trouble with it. We have a lot of people who get reset passwords. So going forward, as you start to use the app, you have questions, you're not sure about something, you can email the support desk at support@axiomnh.com. We'll get back to you with help documentation or whatever the fix may be. There are subsequent trainings coming up. We have one next week, and I think then 2 weeks following that. So feel free to come back and for a subsequent training after you've gone in, use the site. You know, people always have more questions once they've actually gotten their hands on it. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions anyone might